Hello everybody, Weegee here, and a couple months ago I posted a video about my initial thoughts on the recently announced Team RWBY project. About how I was pretty sure that this was going to be a kind of darkest timeline version of Weiss, with her going down a different path than the one she did in the show. If you haven't watched that video yet, that's fine, I'll be going over my thoughts on that again, but more coherently. Since I made that video though, I couldn't stop thinking about where they were going to go with this new project, and how they were going to go about getting to this version of Weiss. It was a question that was always rolling around in the back of my mind while I worked on other things. It's something I had planned on coming back to eventually. Then the official Twitter account posted a countdown to the unveiling of more information on the project, so I guess eventually is now. So without further ado, my theory on what I think this project will be about. And how they will go about getting to those things. I think this project is going to be like a darker timeline version of all of Team RWBY. A timeline where they all go down different paths to the ones in canon. Paths that will lead them to becoming corrupted versions of themselves. Versions of themselves that they could have become with one simple change. And at the upcoming Anime Japan, they're going to unveil the next concept art for the next dark version of a Team RWBY member. It's also possible that they just show all of them, but I think dragging it out like they did with the color trailer would be cool. But if it is just one character, I think it's gonna be everybody's favorite dork, or maybe not so dork in this version, Ruby Rose. As for why I think that, I'll save that for when I get to her, because I'm going to save her for last, as she, aside from Weiss, is who I think will be the most interesting one to theorize about. But first, let's talk about why I think this is going to be a dark version of the characters, starting with the one character we have any evidence for, Weiss. Which leads us to the initial concept art for the project, of Weiss, that they released in February. In this art, we see an older Scarlet Weiss, in Atlesian general garb, bearing a new symbol, sitting on an icy throne that bears a destroyed Schnee symbol. Behind her is an army of robots, what appears to be a bust of Ironwood, and some war banners hanging with presumably Atlas in the background. There are so many interesting things to note here, but let's start with her appearance. Specifically, her scarless face. What does this have to do with alternate timelines, you're probably asking? Well, if you watched the White trailer, you know that she got that scar fighting the Armagigas. And if you read the manga, you know that she fought said Armagigas as a trial to get to Beacon. So that means in this timeline she never fought said Gigas, and by proxy never went to Beacon. Which is the simple change that I mentioned that changes everything. Instead of going to Beacon, she follows in her beloved older sister's footsteps, and joins the military, which is why she is in a general's coat. But unlike her sister, who still bears the Schnee crest, Weiss eventually cuts ties with the Schnee family, including her sister down the line. Hence the destroyed Schnee crest on the throne. This is a Weiss that has closed her heart to everybody, which explains the new crest she bears. A crest that surprisingly no fan artist that I have seen has seemed to replicate right, or at least from what I think it is, which is a heart covered by thorns. But how did Weiss wind up like this? Well, I think this possible bust in the background could explain that. The one that kinda looks like Ironwood? I think that when Weiss joins the military, she is brought under Ironwood's wing, where she quickly becomes his protege. Somebody who he molds to be just like him. Somebody who would do anything for the safety of Atlas and its people. Damn the consequences or moral ambiguity. Because she works under Ironwood, she also works closely with Winter, who continues to train her, leading her to becoming stronger than she was in canon. At first this is fine, Winter and Weiss are happy to work together. But then much like in canon, Salem begins to threaten Atlas. This is when friction starts to begin between Weiss and Winter, with Weiss becoming quite severe in her pursuit to protect Atlas, much like a certain general. But why would this cause friction between them? Well, as we know, Winter has one weakness, Weiss. So when she sees Weiss becoming this cold and different person, somebody who will do whatever it takes to protect Atlas, becoming Ironwood, it forces Winter, much like the bomb did in Volume 8, to realize maybe what they are doing is wrong. And not wanting Weiss to turn out like Ironwood, she tries to intervene, forcing Weiss to make a decision between her and Ironwood and Atlas. But unlike Winter, this Weiss has no such weakness, having closed her heart, and she chooses Ironwood and Atlas over Winter, cutting ties with the final member of her family, striking the Schnee symbol from her life. Eventually, Weiss becomes the general of the Atlesian military, under Ironwood, who, much like in canon, becomes the de facto ruler of Atlas. If Weiss does share Ironwood's desire to protect Atlas, it would explain the robots in the background. They are her indestructible army, kinda like the Iron Legion that Iron Man created to protect the Earth. This is Atlas's protection. It also wouldn't surprise me if we got a darker Penny who serves under Weiss. So that's what I think is going on in this Weiss concept art. which kind of points to a darker version of the rest of the characters, because why only do one? Speaking of that, let's move on to what I think they're going to do with the other characters, which unlike Weiss is going to be pure speculation based on what I think they're going to be doing with the project, based on the single image of Weiss that we have received, starting with what I think they are going to do with the alternate version of Yang Xaio-Long, or should I say Yang Brawin. Yes, you heard that right. I believe in this timeline Raven decided to keep Yang and train her to become the next tribe leader of the Brawin clan. I think the concept art we will get of Yang will be of her ruling over the Brawin clan with a vicious grin on her face. So how did we get there? Well, for one, obviously Raven decides to keep her, which means that she will never have the positive influence of Tai to help her control her anger. Instead, she only has her mother, who sees this anger as only a strength. This will lead Yang to becoming a much more violent person. Under the sole influence of Raven, she would also come to be a person who sees strength as the most important attribute for a leader, and without the influence of Summer, she becomes a person who is lacking in compassion, much like, her birth mother. She in Vernal's place will be Raven's right-hand woman, and eventually the leader of the tribe after beating her mother in a fight. After all, only the strongest deserve to rule. Next we have Blake, and honestly, she was the easiest one to possibly predict where they might be going with. The image we will likely get will be of Blake as the leader of the White Fang. Not the reformed one from Volume 6 though, but the one with the blood red symbol. The one that Sienna started with violence. So obviously this means that Blake will stick with the White Fang. She sticks with Adam, believing completely in his philosophy of making the humans pay for what they have done, of making a world for the funnest. This leads to a much more severe Blake and a much more nihilistic Blake. This version of Blake supports Adam when he decides to try to usurp Sienna as the leader of the White Fang. She becomes his right hand during a civil war within the ranks of the White Fang, between the Adam loyalist and the Sienna loyalist. A bloody war that ends with Adam's side winning, but not without cost. During the final battle, Adam is injured. Seeing this, Blake kills him, considering him to be a liability, a weakness, in a scene very reminiscent of Sienna's death in Volume 5. He served his purpose to the future of the funnest. She then becomes leader of the White Fang herself, which just maybe was her plan from the start. Finally, we get the person who I believe will be the next character shown, Ruby Rose. First, why do I think that Ruby is next? Well, recently on the official Twitter account, we have started getting posts that have been signed by a mysterious R. And who is the R in RWBY? So that's why I think that she is next. Of course, they could just announce all the characters at once and maybe even show a trailer. Now, as for what they are going to do with RWBY, honestly, I have no idea. And that's what makes her the most interesting to me. Unlike the rest of the characters, there's no simple change in the backstory they could make to RWBY that would have a drastic change. Maybe after losing her mother, Tai never recovers and RWBY is taken in by Crow. But that wouldn't really lead to that much of a different RWBY, would it? She would be a better fighter, but Crow's a good dude, so she would wind up nearly the same. Honestly, the reverse would probably happen. Crow would change to be a better father than RWBY. He would wind up like the person he is in the most recent volumes, much sooner. They could go with something super out there like Salem kidnapping her and training her, but that would just make her flat out evil, unlike the moral grayness they are probably going for with the rest of the characters. There's no realistic change they could make to RWBY that would change her moral stance. So maybe instead RWBY follows the same road. Except with no Team RWBY, this 15-year-old silver-eyed prodigy is taken in by Ozpin, and she is brought into his inner circle much earlier, becoming his top agent, trained by all these top huntsmen. And after the death of Ozpin, she is tasked with recruiting her own inner circle to combat Salem, which brings her to trying to recruit the rest of Team RWBY, who are all notable fighters at this point. After all, Team RWBY needs to be a team at some point in this. Maybe it's this different RWBY that kind of brings the good out in the rest of Team RWBY, much like she does in the actual show. Maybe the point of this show is to show the importance of RWBY to these characters. And that's where I think this project is going based on the single image that we have received. So where do you think the project is going? Do you think there's any merit to my analysis? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, give it a like and subscribe. See you on the 26th when we find out if any of what I said is going to happen. Weegee out.